Matt and Ryan are on a trek through the Himalayan mountains to Mount Everest. They're about 1 day away from arriving at base camp. They arrive at a clearing that's perfect for an overnight stay. They set up camp and start a fire. As they're cooking their food, Ryan heard something off in the distance. He asked Matt if he heard it. Before Matt could answer, the noise rang out again, only this time they both heard it. Thinking it was just an animal, they continued with dinner. After dinner, they went to bed. They needed to get an early start to make it to base camp the next day. As they were sleeping, a roar in the distance pierced the silence. They were both startled awake. What the fuck was that? Matt nervously asked. Ryan, shaking his head, shrugged his shoulders. The sound of something walking around their camp was heard. It sounded like it was walking on two legs. It seemed to walk in and out of their camp. The next day, they asked the Sherpas about it. Their guides told them they got a visit from the Yeti. The Yeti, also known as the Abominable Snowman, is an Asian Bigfoot found in the Himalayas. It inhabits Nepal, Tibet, Russia, and India. The Yeti is the closest living relative to a prehistoric ape that lived in Asia 300,000 years ago. In Buddhist mythology, the Yetis were peaceful creatures that were very shy and lived in dense snow caves of the glaciers which form the Ganges River in India. The name Yeti derives from Yeta, meaning rock thing. Tibetan and Nepalese monasteries have collected several skulls and bones of the Yetis, some of which reside in the Smithsonian Museum today. Although one of their specimens was proven to be a human bone, the remaining archived in the museum are still in question. Generally, Yetis are said to stand from 8 to 10.5 feet tall, have a furry coat of brown, reddish, or black hair, and resemble a huge, upright walking ape. Contrary to popular misconception, the Yeti is not white. There have been no reports of a white Yeti. Moreover, 3 distinct varieties of Yeti are commonly identified by cryptozoologists. The small Tooma, sometimes called the Little Yeti, is just 3 to 4.5 feet in height, with reddish-gray hair and a pointed, sloping head. It's like a fuzzy little orphan Annie. They are said to live in warmer habitats than the other Yetis, the forested mountain valleys below the snow line in Nepal, Bhutan, Tibet, and Sikkim, where they feed on small animals. It has been proposed that the Tooma is simply a juvenile or female meta. The generally human-sized meta is the next bigger Yeti. This Yeti is described as a stocky, ape-like creature with a distinctly human quality, around 6 feet in height, 200 to 400 pounds, with coarse, short reddish-brown hair, a pointy, crowned conical head, a wide mouth with large teeth, very long arms, and no tail. They are peaceful creatures that live in the dense Himalayan rhododendron forests at elevations of 15,000 to 18,000 feet. They leave their famous tracks when they cross the mountains from valley to valley. And finally, the giant and dangerous Zuta, a Bigfoot-like animal sometimes thought to be a sort of bear. The Big Yeti is said to be primarily quadrupedal, though it can walk bipedally. It towers between 8 and 10 feet tall and weighing in at a trim 400 to 600 pounds. It's known for its attacks on yaks, which it kills by grabbing the horns and twisting the head. This Yeti is reported from 13,000 to 15,000 feet and is often considered a type of large bear by cryptozoologists, though many other researchers see it as an ape. I see it like this. However, the boundaries between these types are not always rigidly defined. A very similar cryptid, considered separate from the Yeti by some authorities, called the Dramo, is frequently confused or lumped together with the Big Yeti or the human-sized Yeti, although they're usually considered one and the same creature. They're just given different regional names. The understanding that there is more than one type of Yeti is not a fact widely known outside of cryptozoology. As Lauren Coleman states, this both explains and makes problematic the wide range of theories regarding the Yeti's identity, as different theories may be valid with different Yetis. That makes sense. Even larger still is the Nyalmo, a true giant, said to be 13 to 20 feet high. Also with an enormous conical head. It's a giant cone head. They feed on yaks, mountain sheep, and possibly people. They wander the eternal snows at altitudes above 13,000 feet. Written accounts of the Tibetan legend date back as far as the 12th century. Yeti are believed to live in the alpine forest below the snow line, although they will brave higher altitude for food and shelter. Their diet consists of mosses, frogs, and pikas that live on the mountain. Hey, that's keto. In many stories, the Yeti is nocturnal and emits a high-pitched scream or whistle. In Tibetan tradition, it is more common to hear a Yeti than to see one. I could see that. The two-legged human-sized Yeti appears in many Buddhist temple decorations and religious painted scrolls. According to religious and historical Tibetan texts from the 12th century, these wild people come from shared ancestors, although the Mita is neither fully human or fully animal. This is why much of the art in Tibetan temples shows the Yeti as a rebirth between humans and animals. Tibetan Buddhist stories feature Yetis as both kind and malevolent creatures, so a lot like humans. One popular tale from the Himalayas tells of a yogi helping a wild man with an infected foot from a splinter. The yogi kindly removes the splinter and cleans the wound. The grateful Yeti thanks the yogi by bringing him a tiger, which the man skins and offers to a monastery. I guess the tiger was already dead when the Yeti handed it to him. Yeti legends and stories were culturally important long before the Western world was even aware of their existence. The Yeti is also said to be a descendant of the Monkey King, a very famous figure from Asian mythology. It's said that the Yeti is the offspring of the Monkey King and an ogre. Ew, I don't even want to think about that. Ugh. In most of the Tibetan tales, the Yeti is a symbol of danger. The moral of the stories is a warning to avoid dangerous wild animals and to stay close and safe within the community. That's a pretty good rule of thumb. The Yeti was even mentioned in pre-Buddhist cultures, such as the Lecha people, who worshipped a glacier giant, a god of the hunt in the region. Hodgson account. In 1832, British naturalist Brian Hodgson, researching mammals in Nepal, noted that no monkeys could be found in the northern and central regions, but a footnote mentioned that during one expedition, frightened local hunters fled what they believed to be a wild man. It was around 5 a.m. and still mostly dark. A few porters were already awake and adding wood to the dwindling campfire. The rest were asleep. As they warmed their hands to the small fire, they heard a call from the distance. They looked at each other and quickly grabbed their rifles. A few minutes later, they heard the sound of footsteps coming from off in the forest. They began waking their friends in a slight frenzy, when out of nowhere, they heard it again, right outside their camp. They looked in that direction and saw the silhouette of a hairy man trampling through the trees toward them. It was the wild man of the snows. They yelled in terror, dropped their weapons, and started running off into the forest away from the sound. Their boss, Brian Hodgson, awoke and stuck his head out of his tent to see what the hell was going on. As one of the Sherpas was going by his tent, Hodgson stopped him and asked what the commotion was about. The frightened guide said, It was big. It must be at least 8 foot tall, covered in hair, with no tail. It is huge and scary and angry. It's a demon. He's going to kill us and eat us. We have to leave now. Just then, another roar came from just outside the camp. The Sherpa released Hodgson's arm and tore off into the woods, screaming for his life. What a coward. I would have Rambo'd it. Hodgson grabbed his rifle and started looking around. He believed it was an orangutan looking for its mate. After an hour of searching and coming up empty, he sat down to write in his journal. No monkeys were found or traces of them, but the encounter of the curious humanoid that invaded his camp made him think twice about dismissing it as a local primate. He went, The Lawrence Waddell Prince. The year was 1887, and Lawrence Waddell, a major with the British Indian Army, was on leave and making the most of his time off. You know what that means? His profession was as a medic, though he had a general interest in the sciences. During his trek toward Darjeeling in 1887, he saw something he couldn't explain. Snow fell heavily, and a driving hurricane of loose, powdery snow was fast obliterating their footprints. One of the porters pointed out there was a great danger of losing their way and sharing the fate of the late Captain Harmon in 1881. Captain Harmon's course had brought him along this very same route at the time of his demise. Harmon died of frostbite while stationed in a temporary encampment waiting on the delivery of his baggage coolies, which never arrived. Fucking DHL. Fortunately, Waddell's Tibetan porters were much more reliable. The captain of this rugged mountain team could be seen through the falling snow ahead of him, poised upon a mountain yak as it bobbed along. Waddell rode a pony instead, though it was unable to keep up with the curious-looking mountain animals his Tibetan friends were riding. The captain kindly offered Waddell the use of his yak. Waddell accepted the offer and approached the big animal. The big yak lunged at Waddell. Taken aback, Waddell tried again. Again, it lunged at him, but this time it tried to bite him. Luckily, it was held back by Sherpas by a rope through its nose ring. Waddell gave up on trying to ride it and went back to his pony. After several hours of trekking along, the pile of ropes that fastened the saddle to the yak loosened, and the captain came crashing down from his high perch. As he toppled down, all his cooking pots and pans that were slung on behind the saddle came thundering down on top of him. That'd be pretty fucking funny there. Waddell figured this was typical of any attempt to traverse the steep mountains of northeastern India. Just have your camera ready and say, "I love YouTube." However, the occasion ended up providing more excitement than just a bad snowstorm. At one point in their perilous trek, the party came across an unusual set of tracks in the snow. This greatly excited the Tibetan crew. They made gestures of something big and tall. Waddell got off his mount to get a closer look at the prints. He looked at them from a scientific point of view and tried to equate them with something familiar. After investigating several different prints before they got covered by the fallen snow, he came to the conclusion that they were the prints of the great yellow bear. It's indigenous to the area, but rarely seen. It's a carnivore, and its favorite meal is yaks. He wrote in his journal, "Although most of the Tibetans know this bear well enough to give it a wide berth, they live in such an atmosphere of superstition that they are always ready to find extraordinary and supernatural explanations of uncommon events." Saying extraordinary and uncommon are two different words is splitting hairs. The account by Waddell would inspire many readers, most notably because it is among the earliest reports written by a Westerner which describes the famous Yeti. It occasionally makes treks across the frigid snowfields at higher altitudes in order to pass through the area, inevitably leaving behind tracks which Waddell and his company observed during that snowstorm in 1887. Colonel Howard Bury account. In September 1921, Colonel Howard Bury was leading an expedition making an attempt on the north face of Mount Everest. At 4 a.m., they set out on their way to a camp at Loch Pala. Under the moonlight, the mountains showed up nearly as brightly as in the daytime. During their climb, at about 17,000 feet, the colonel noticed movement on the hill ahead. He stopped his crew and pointed it out to them. He and his porters watched through their binoculars as a number of dark forms moved around on a snowfield. Puzzled as to what they were, they decided to investigate these creatures. They marched through the blowing deep snow. It took a great deal of time, but they finally made it to the snowfield where they saw the creatures. When they arrived at the area, they did see several animal tracks. Most were those of hares and foxes, but one set of tracks was very unusual, and it looked like a human foot. Howard Bury closely examined them and said, "The size of the prints are 3 times the size of normal humans." The local porters started freaking out and stating that the prints belonged to the wild man of the snows. Howard Bury reported the name of this creature as Metakangmi, which roughly translates to man-bear snow creature. It was later mistranslated by news reporter Henry Newman as the Abominable Snowman, which is how that term got started. Howard Bury, being the skeptical scientist he is, of course, felt the tracks were more likely caused by a large, loping gray wolf, which had formed double tracks in the soft, melting snow that merely resembled those of a barefooted man. That's got to be one hell of a big wolf. During his expedition, Howard Bury sent notes on his progress back to his contacts in India, so newspapers and the like would have an ongoing progress report. His notes for September 22nd just briefly mentioned the details about the tracks, along with several other details of the climb for the day. The newspapers completely ignored everything except his paragraph about the mysterious tracks. Well, yeah, I'd be more interested in the Yeti tracks than, how you couldn't find a place to take a shit. N.A. Tombazi account. Photographer N.A. Tombazi was hiking with his guides at around 15,000 feet in the Himalayas when they alerted him to the presence of something very strange. Though his view was initially obstructed by the reflection of the sun off the snow, Tombazi repositioned himself and could eventually make out a human-like shape around 200 or 300 meters away, walking upright. It was covered in hair and wearing no clothes. It's a Bohemian Yeti. Tombazi watched in awe as the being pulled at and uprooted bushes for some time before it wandered off out of view. He led the expedition to investigate the site of the critter. When they arrived, he found footprints, several of them. They were similar in shape to those of a man, but only 6 to 7 inches long and 4 inches wide. The prints were undoubtedly those of a biped. His guides stated the creature was the Kanchenjunga demon, a feared, hairy, deadly beast. Skeptical, Tombazi speculated the being was a wandering hermit or holy man. Though the lack of clothes and bare feet were considered odd for such an extreme altitude. So absolutely not human. Sir Edmund Hillary's famous Yeti expedition. Sir Edmund Hillary was one of the first two men to climb the world's highest mountain, Mount Everest. He climbed the 29,035-foot peak with Sherpa Tenzing Norgay, reaching the top on May 29, 1953. Within cryptozoology, Sir Edmund Hillary will always be remembered as the man who hunted the Yeti. In the 1950s, curiosity about the Abominable Snowman drew Edmund Hillary into the search. Stories of hairy, man-like creatures were known worldwide. Footprints in the snow and in mud were found to indicate some such cryptids were active in out-of-the-way places in Nepal, Tibet, and the surrounding region. In 1952, Hillary, along with George Lowe, were exploring along the side of a mountain. With Hillary leading the way through the thick falling snow, he spotted a tuft of hair hanging on a tree branch. After closer examination, he declared it to be from the Yeti. After taking it in to be analyzed, he discovered it came from an unknown animal. In 1953, Hillary was trudging through the Barrancola Range when he noticed large tracks that were about 6 feet apart. Whatever it was had to be very tall with very long legs. The next year, 2 British members of Hillary's team were scouting around. After seeing several obvious bear tracks, they discovered some Yeti tracks in the Choyang Valley leading deep into the forest. When Hillary went to the Himalayas to look for the Yeti, he noted that there were several unknown primates still undiscovered in any formal way that survived there. Among the varieties was one called the Nyalmo. Many Sherpas and holy men he talked to in north-central Nepal said they had seen it many times. It was giant-sized, up to 20 feet tall, man-like, hairy, and enjoyed shaking giant pine trees in trials of strength, while other Nyalmos sat around and clapped their hands. They're easily entertained. Incident of Dyatlov Pass. On February 2nd, 1959, 9 college students hiked up the icy slopes of the Ural Mountains in the heart of Russia, but never made it out alive. Investigators have never been able to give a definitive answer behind who or what caused the bizarre crime scene. The students were camped out in a mountain pass which would soon be named Dyatlov Pass. Leading the group was Igor Dyatlov. It was getting late, and Igor said that it was time to rest. They had a long way to go to get to their destination. Later that night, a strange happening occurred in the Ural Mountains in Russia. Something walked through their camp and growled. Startled, several of the students woke up and looked out of their tents. Before they could alert the others, they felt a hard thud on their head and were knocked unconscious. One of the kids saw their friend get hit and sounded the alarm. Their screams echoed off the mountains. Loud roars were heard everywhere. Knowing the tents would offer little protection from these monsters, the remaining campers attempted to flee, but the zippers on the tents were frozen. They pulled out a pocket knife, sliced open the side of the tent, and bolted away from the camp. some not wearing all their clothes, and one not wearing any at all. One by one, they were killed, each one in a different way. An investigation ensued. According to the investigators at the time, the demise of the group was due to a compelling natural force. Could you be just a little more vague? The students' bodies were found scattered across the campsite in 3 distinct groups, some partially naked and with unusual injuries, including crushed ribs, a fractured skull, and one hiker was mutilated with her eyes gouged out and tongue removed. Speculation ran wild as to what happened. Could it have been a government top-secret weapon that killed them? They are in Russia. Or an indigenous local tribe that attacked them for trespassing on their land. But perhaps more peculiar of all, why did the Soviet government suppress the autopsies and other reports for 30 years? Because they're terrified of Russian misinformation. Proof has been found that the hikers were not alone. Well, obviously. Several barefoot prints in the snow were seen. Some were human-sized and some were not. A photograph taken by one of the hikers a day before they died suggests that they encountered a Yeti. To this day, it is unknown what actually killed these hikers. Yeti sightings continue at Dyatlov Pass. They have occurred as recently as 2008, when a team of Japanese climbers photographed some strange footprints all around the area. Misidentification of Himalayan wildlife has been suggested as an explanation for some Yeti sightings, including a langur monkey living at lower altitudes, the Tibetan blue bear, and the Himalayan brown bear. Some have also advised that the Yeti could be a human hermit. It's a snow hobbit. A well-publicized expedition to Bhutan reported that a hair sample had been obtained which, by DNA analysis by Professor Brian Sykes, could not be matched to any known animal. Analysis completed after the media release, however, revealed that the samples were from a brown bear and an Asiatic black bear. In 1986, South Tyrolean mountaineer Reinhold Messner claimed to have a face-to-face encounter with a Yeti. He wrote a book, My Quest for the Yeti, and claims to have killed one. According to Messner, the Yeti is actually the endangered Himalayan brown bear, which can walk both upright or on all fours. The 1983 Barren Valley discoveries prompted 3 years of research on the tree bear theory. From that research, the conclusion was that the Asiatic black bear, when about 2 years old, spends a lot of time in trees to avoid being attacked by larger male bears on the ground. During this tree period, that lasts nearly 2 years, young bears train their inner claw outward, allowing an opposable grip. The imprint in the snow of a hind paw coming over the front paw appears to have a big toe. This is even more human-like when the bear is going slightly uphill, so the hind paw print extends the overprint backward and makes a hominid-appearing track, in that it is elongated like a human foot with a big toe. It makes a 4-footed animal's gait now appear bipedal. That might explain some of the prints, but not all of them. In 2001, a British zoologist collected a few strands of hair from a hollow cedar tree in Bhutan. Under DNA analysis, the hair could not be identified as coming from any animal known to science. Was this conclusive proof that some yet unidentified creature lived in the Himalayas? Yes. In October 2013, Oxford geneticist Brian Sykes put out a call to all Yeti believers and institutions around the world claiming to have a piece of Yeti hair, teeth, or tissue taken from a sighting to send him a sample. He received 57 samples, 36 of which were chosen for DNA analysis, according to University College London. These samples were then compared with the genomes of other animals stored on a database of all published DNA sequences. Most of the samples turned out to be from well-known animals, such as cows, horses, and bears. However, Sykes found that 2 of the samples, one taken from a beast shot in the Kashmiri region of Ladakh 40 years ago, and another found in Bhutan a decade ago, were a 100% match with the polar bear jawbone found in Svalbard, Norway. It was a Pleistocene polar bear that lived sometime between 40,000 and 120,000 years ago, a period of time when the polar bear and closely related brown bear were separating as a species. Sykes thought the sample was probably a hybrid of a polar bear and a brown bear. I'll call it a brown polar bear. Sykes said, "We have an exact genetic match between 2 samples from the Himalayas and an ancient polar bear." Some speculate that these reported creatures could be present-day specimens of the extinct giant ape, Gigantopithecus. However, the Yeti is generally described as bipedal, and most scientists believe Gigantopithecus to have been quadrupedal, and so massive that unless it evolved specifically as a bipedal ape, walking upright would have been even more difficult for the now extinct primate than it is for its surviving quadrupedal relative, the orangutan. However, the late Dr. Grover Krantz has pointed out that the lower jaw of Gigantopithecus widens and flares out, indicating that the neck vertebra would be directly under the head, suggesting an upright stance. The Yeti has broad shoulders, unlike those of bears, whose scapula lie close to the body. The Yeti walks erect. Bears do not. At least the majority don't, and not for very long. The Yeti seems to have an opposable thumb, allowing it primitive tool use, such as hurling rocks. No bears can do this. Moreover, eyewitness accounts describe a flat, ape-like face, unlike that of any bear. Overall, a giant ape seems like a more plausible explanation for the Yeti. In 2017, a team of scientists analyzed another 24 supposed Yeti specimens taken from the Himalayas and Tibetan Plateau, including bone, tooth, skin, hair, and fecal samples. All but one of the samples, which was from a dog, were from bears, including Himalayan bears who occupy the northwestern plateau. Himalayan bears have paler, reddish-brown fur, which is very similar to the description of the hair on the original Tibetan Yetis. Interestingly, the scientists discovered that the Himalayan brown bear came from a unique evolutionary lineage that diverged from all other brown bears around 650,000 years ago. So, in their report, the scientists said that the study's findings strongly suggest that Yetis are local brown and black bears, with flat faces and opposable thumbs, I guess. The Yeti is 100% real. But what is it? Is it a brown or black bear? Is it the surviving offspring of a thought-to-be extinct Pleistocene polar bear from 120,000 years ago? Is it the result of the fabled Monkey King and an ogre's sexy time? Again, ew. Or is it a subspecies of Bigfoot? The theories are fairly widespread. The Yeti has been labeled the guardian of the Himalayan mountains. However, ironically, it's the natives who have become protective of this obscure beast. Many tribes in the area consider the Yeti a divine being and don't appreciate cynics who question its existence or simplify the sightings as nothing more than rare Himalayan wildlife. That's scientists for you. Although they do seem to favor an upright walking bear or creature of some sort. Either way, I wouldn't want to run into it on the side of a mountain. If I saw or heard it, I would just probably pack my shit and just get the fuck out of there. I've seen this movie before. I don't want to be eaten by the bumble.